Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to another episode of Plugged In, where we plug you into the socket of reality. We are your hosts, Zishan and Ali, and today we have two special guests joining us today to talk about the environment and Islam. And our two special guests are none other than Brother Asadullah Ali Al-Andalusi and Brother Nadeem Haque. Brother Asadullah is a research fellow for Haque Institute and the founder of the Andalusian Project, an independent research platform for counter Islamophobia studies. He holds a degree in both Western and Islamic philosophy and currently is pursuing his PhD in Islamic studies. He specializes in topics related to the philosophy of science, atheism, terrorism, Islamic political thought, and ethics, and other issues surrounding the global Muslim community. And our other esteemed guest is Brother Nadeem Haque. Brother Nadeem is a philosopher of science, belief systems, and the environment, focusing on the Quran. He is the author of a number of books and many articles and papers in this area. He has co-authored the unpublished book Equilibrium. He's the director of the Institute of Higher Reasoning and is a civil and environmental engineer by profession. One of his talks was at Harvard University in 2013 on animals and Islam. He is the grandson of the late Al-Hafiz B.A. Masri, who wrote the pioneering work called Animals in Islam, which is actually being reissued. I'd like to welcome you both, brothers, to the show.
Assalamu alaikum.
So we're going to get right into the thick of things right now in our show, and my first question to you both, brothers, is how does the protection of the environment, and I'm gonna add in animal rights as well. Like, how does the protection of the environment, animal rights, and the Islam intersect? If you kind of share your take on that, and Brother Asadullah, you can kind of start first.
You want me to start? Okay. Assalamu alaikum.
Welcome, salam.
How do basically you're talking about like environmental
protection,
awareness, protection tie into Islamic thought.
Yes, exactly.
Well, there are a number of things that we could discuss with relation to that. One of the things that we have to understand is that everything is a creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everything was created by Allah for a specific purpose, a specific reason. And just as He has created our own bodies for a specific reason and a specific purpose, and we have to abide by specific rules and regulations regarding that, in the same way He has created the earth, and we have to abide by certain rules and regulations regarding that. One of the reasons that I before getting kind of into more specifics as to how Islam ties into that, one of the reasons that I was always really interested in protecting the environment and animals and sustaining everything everywhere we live is because when I was living in Malaysia, a Muslim majority country, I noticed a couple of strange things there. And one of them was that there was a lack of awareness with respect to the environment and protecting it, especially with regard to like littering. I gave a talk not too long ago in IAIS in regards to the littering problem in Malaysia. And you notice this everywhere you go there is that people don't have any they're not in tune with their environment at all. I mean, they literally throw garbage anywhere they please as a matter of convenience. And it's very problematic because they don't realize that there's a connection between that and also their own health. When you go there, you'll notice that near many masjids and things like this is that you'll see that there's garbage even around the mosque. Yet they have this etiquette where they won't do it within their own homes or within the mosque itself. They do it only outside because they don't regard the trees and the grass and things like this as having any sort of value. Yet at the same time, they'll eat from those same places, which is quite strange. But you can tell that there's a lack of awareness there. And when a lot of the local people get sick, they don't realize that there's a connection between how they're treating their environment and their own illnesses. Like, for instance, there's a problem with something called dengue in Malaysia, which is a virus that's spread through mosquitoes, and it basically dehydrates you to the point of death. And it's actually a very big problem in Malaysia. And what they don't realize is that when they throw garbage into, say, still water, it provides a breeding ground for mosquitoes. But they haven't drawn that connection yet. So when I see these things, it automatically kind of like set a spark in my mind that there is a problem in the Muslim world, and that we need to start explaining, Islamic principles in relation to this. So what I would say is that human beings have been created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as successors on earth, as those who are to maintain and to look over God's creation, not just ourselves, because we are intimately connected. Or without, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't survive. All of our food, all of our medicine, everything comes from the environment. So when we hurt the environment, we are also hurting our own chances of survival. And we're also undermining the principles of our own religion because we are taking everything out of balance. And I don't know if I'm talking too much. So
no, not at all. And I actually had the pleasure of actually watching and hearing you at that lecture in Malaysia. And one of the things you mentioned was how accountability is key in Islam, right? And you had brought in the example of Khalifa Umar ibn al-Khattab, where he said that he would be held responsible if even a dog went starving within the community, right? So it looks like a lot of Muslims are not even aware of this, or don't care. I'm not sure what the I guess the issue is kind of complex. But you also talked about, and before I know Nadeem wants to jump in, but you also you talked about certain reforms that you had suggested to the laws of Malaysia to protect the environment. I'm just out of curiosity. Did anything happen? Did they take your suggestions? Did they implement any of them at all?
I had a number of discussions with some of the ministers and things like this, individuals who had come to the lecture, and then I had some additional talks later on. They were rather informal, to be honest. There was a lot of interest in policy reform. The problem, I think, has more to do with the fact that in Malaysia, a lot of the issues regarding the environment, a lot of the laws regarding the environment are in different acts, and they're actually quite contradictory. And what my suggestion was is that we consolidate all those different laws into one act, one environmental act. I think it's because of due to money and sort of bureaucracy that they largely did not accept my suggestions, but they were interested. You could see that people were interested in it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But they can or not is a different story.
Yeah. Brother Nadeem, I know you've been waiting. If you can add your thoughts on this.
Yeah. So, Brother Asadullah, I think he's covered most of what I wanted to say. But the question was, how does the protection of the environment, animal rights, and Islam intersect? So there's a short answer, and the long answer is the book that I wrote that hasn't been published, right? But the short answer is that God has created this universe for a purpose, and the purpose is a test. And the test is to see who would maintain the balance. And the balance is maintained by and in the biosphere, by plants and animals. And therefore, we are to maintain it by being in submission to God. And so that's how these three intersect. But if you want me to elaborate a bit, I can do so.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't mind,
okay.
and Brother Asadullah, you can jump in any time as well.
Yep,
go ahead.
When I was doing some the research on animals in Islam, I came up with four principles that I extracted from the Quran, and I think these principles are really comprehensive. They're like Newton's laws, because with Newton's laws, the three laws, so-called Newton's laws, because actually the Muslims knew about them before Newton. You can actually explain the whole of mechanics. So similarly, with these four principles, you can explain the whole of these are principles for the economics as well. You just have to tweak it a bit, or the animals or the environment. So these four principles, I wrote a paper on this, and basically the first one is that Allah owns the universe, right? So this is the basic idea. Then the second one is it's actually al-mizan, which means the balance. But as you know that Mehran and we worked on this concept called the equigenic rights, which means that the rights are the equigenic right is something that we recognize from the balance of nature if we use our reason. And it's something that is not a man-made right. It's something that is not synthetic. It's something from nature. And if we disrupt, for example, let's say we kill off snakes, for example, then the rat population will increase. When the rat population increases, then they'll eat all the crops, and then the people will starve. So the right has the snake has an inherent right not to be harmed, and you recognize that through reason, through this thing which we call the equigenic principle. And we came up with this term so that we were hoping that it would spread, and it is, alhamdulillah, slowly, among the non-Muslims too. So equi, we're using these terms, like equi means equal, and genic is origin. So there's the origin in the equilibrium, which is what the Quran is talking about. And the third ecological recognition is that animals and human beings are in communities. And the fourth one is that animals and human beings have personhood. So the idea here is that God wants you to, when you look at, so there are verses related to all these, of course, and so Allah wants you to maintain these four principles, these four ignitions. And if you do, then you'll end up with an optimal society. Because, for example, if you don't you don't own things and God owns them, then it means you're a trustee, and I think that's the next question is related to that. And therefore, you will take care of that, because you're conscious of God. But we can get into that later. And then the mizan is, you can't upset the balance. And the third one is you will take care of animals in communities because they have communities and they have their own rights, just as we have our rights. And we have to share this planet with them. And, of course, they help to maintain the balance too, right? So, and then, of course, if animals are in communities and humans are in communities, we have a personhood, right? Everybody has an individual right. So there's a kind of an interrelationship between these four principles. So that's what I want to say.
Yeah, and exactly. Okay. And if we disturb the balance, then through the law of cause and effect, then it's going to affect. There's going to be basically negative consequences. And I believe, Brother Asadullah, you talked about this in your lecture as well. That if we pollute you, then they're going to pollute us, right? Because you had mentioned that, and you can kind of touch upon that as well, Brother Asadullah, if you want to add to this.
Yeah, certainly. One of the things that is often a recurring theme throughout the Quran is that your actions will be repaid to you, whether in this world or the next, and that also includes how you treat the creation of Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. So, I mean, it's interesting that a lot of people don't really see this. They don't really understand this because, there's a lack of awareness. But I wanted to mention sort of the aspects of balance as well. I mean, I think it's really fascinating when you look at how little a change that you need in order to make a major impact on the world. So, for example, I had brought up the issue with mosquitoes earlier in Malaysia. But if you I don't know if you watch National Geographic, but there was a story not too long ago. I believe that they introduced some wolves into Yellowstone Park because the deer population was way too high, and it was literally I think just over 10 or so, not too many. And I think within a year or so, not only did the deer population go down, but the entire ecosystem dramatically changed. And what I mean by that is even the river itself changed course, because not only had the wolves changed the deer population by making it decline, but as a result of that, the deer now were grazing in different locations, which also led to other animals moving to different locations. Like a chain reaction.
Exactly.
And even the beavers were starting to set up their dams in different places. That's why the river changed. And then as a result of the river changing, new plants were growing in different locations, things like this. So how dramatic the environment can change based on small activities that other animals do, but also humans do. And if we look around the world today, we notice that we had a massive problem with pollution for quite some time. I think recently scientists have started to suggest that the ozone layer is now correcting itself. But prior to that, we were in this phase where it's like, if we do not start correcting our use of emissions and our pollution problems, we're going to have severe climate change, which we have also noticed in the past couple of years. I don't know if you realize this as well, but when I was a young child, I lived in Florida for some time, and in the United States here, and I experienced quite a few hurricanes. Some pretty bad ones like Hurricane Andrew, things like that.
Yep.
But I can tell you with a great deal of certainty that the hurricanes that I experienced during my youth were substantially smaller in comparison to the ones that we have today. And what I mean by substantially is that they've doubled in size. And that's quite worrying, And one of the things that before we go on, I want to touch up on is probably why there is an issue here with awareness and a lack of education. It's one thing to educate people, but it's another thing to put them in the habit of caring for the environment, of having concern for it. And I remember having some discussions with my professor in this respect. We disagreed. We believed that, he believed that in order to really have environmental awareness, you have to start teaching kids early about environmental principles, about Islamic principles related to that. And actually, I disagreed. I think it's a good thing to teach them in a basic manner. But if you know anything about your own childhood and about how children are, they don't really work that way. They don't really behave in that manner. Like if you tell them, well, here's the reason that we have to protect the environment, it really doesn't come across. They don't really understand it that well. If you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like when I was a kid, basically I was taught that you need to pick up the trash and that's it. Just don't do it. Don't throw it on the ground. It's bad. And then it was kind of pushed into me as a habit in my peers. And over time, as I learned about those principles, then they became more meaningful, because education, it really has to start off as a habit. When you're young, you learn about mathematics, you learn about language and things like this. You don't really understand what they mean, but you do them out of habit. And then down the line, as your brain, becomes more mature, then of course you start to understand the reasons behind those things. So we really need to start off with our youth by getting to the habit of teaching them environmental awareness, rather than trying to get them to understand what it means.
Yeah. Basically, so implementing action at a very young age is very important. Basically,
yeah.
We can tell them everything they would know, but if we're not pressing upon action at the same time, then it doesn't really serve the purpose, right?
Yeah,
sorry, go on, brother.
No, go ahead, Ali.
Yeah, you can jump in, I don't mind.
Yeah, no, you pretty much. I was going to ask you the same questions. How can we raise awareness? Us humans being a Khalifa or successors on this very earth. And obviously, Zishan, as you mentioned, that implementing action, with kids at a very young age is critical for them when they grow up to be aware of the environment aspect as well. But sometimes also, it's kind of intriguing because sometimes we hold these seminars and these talks about environment, and most of the times we see, for example, bottled water. Plastic bottles, actually on the tables of the seminars, which are trying to raise awareness, about the environment, and how plastic takes, hundreds of years to, get decomposed back into the earth and all that kind of stuff. So obviously, implementation, at a very young age is also critical. But, don't you think that, as we as adults trying to raise awareness also have to reflect, the practice within ourselves as well?
Yes, and I believe that is essential. We also need to instill habits into ourselves when we have not already had those habits, because it's hard to break bad habits. So, for example, one of the things that I suggested for a Malaysian community was that they copy their neighbors next door. Singapore. Singapore has very extremely strict littering laws. Even for example, if you even put gum on the ground, you're charged like $500. not only that, but you could also serve jail time, and you have to do community service by cleaning up litter. The punishments are quite harsh because they're and rightfully so, because Singapore is like only 3 hours across. I mean, you can literally drive from one end to the other in less time. And if they start polluting their environment, you have a huge population there. Imagine the consequences of having a littered environment that's only 3 hours across. I mean, that's a huge issue. That can cause a lot of problems, especially with all the congestion there. They already have issues with people getting sick. Because one person gets sick, the entire country gets sick in a couple of hours. We have to have this same sort of what I call like an emergency mentality that even though we don't see the immediate consequences, we have to realize that there will be consequences. And if it doesn't affect us, it's going to affect our children.
Exactly. Brother Nadeem, I know you wanted to add to this.
No, there's not really too much to add. I think you've covered it really well, all three of you. If you want, we can go on to the next question if you want that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, before we jump into, I just wanted to kind of, ask a second question, which I've been waiting to ask. As we're witnessing a lifestyle change, pretty much across the globe, especially when it comes to, for example, how we eat because of our busy lifestyles. And I would like to bring your, both of you, Nadeem and Brother Asadullah, attention to the rapid increase in people moving to the cities and preferring takeouts instead of cooking meals at home, as I said before, due to extremely busy lifestyles, which also, as per recent research, has clogged the recycling processing plant's capacity in dealing with an overload of disposables usage in Toronto. Should the cities adapt to our changing lifestyles, or we as a society need to be more aware and conscious of how we eat and reform our lives in a sustainable manner? And the reason I ask that question is, what comes to my mind, in North America is, for example, the Mennonites and the Amish community, and how they actually, are pro permaculture, and self-sufficiency is the standard they live by. And shouldn't Muslims be learning, or at least, be aware of this more so than the other sects of the society?
Yeah. So, do you want me to answer?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead. Jump in.
Yeah. Okay. So, this question is a very big and complicated question, because you see, our lifestyles and cities, the way they develop, they're a result of worldviews. And currently the worldview is kind of very much against this whole concept of the balance, and that there's a creator and we must be conscious of the creator. And it's a society that is very anthropocentric, so it has this kind of concept of dominating nature, right? So this idea of dominating nature, then tends to lead to a certain kind of development of society. And then, so really what should happen is that if there are enough people who start to think the way we've been talking, then you would help to change the policies. And once you change the policies, then you can get back into a more natural lifestyle where there's less pollution, where we eat the right kind of foods, where there's no factory farming, all these kind of things, because then we'll be sensitive. We'll be sensitive to all these things, right? So, but that doesn't mean it's not happening. I work at York Region, and I was in charge of developing the asset management plan for York Region, and working with the experts who develop, these facilities that do the recycling, right? And so there are tremendous advances that have been made, and people are getting more conscious. And even in the area of pollution, they're more conscious about examining that. There are limits to pollution, but nonetheless, we live in a capitalistic society that's based on the interest rate system, for example. So everything interconnects. The verse in the Quran that talks about the balance, that you should maintain the balance. It also talks about economics in the same passage, right? So all these things are very interconnected, and so policies are a result of worldviews. And that doesn't mean that we can't change the policy, as Brother Asadullah is doing. He's trying to help change those policies, right? So, but definitely we should not succumb to them. The way society is, we should rather make the society change towards the proper view. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, exactly. Brothers, Asadullah, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's covered a great deal of it. I just have to discuss kind of like, first off, how we got to this point that we are at in regards to food.
Yep.
First off, it should be noted that it was actually quite practical, the way that we have much of our food today. And it became abused over time. So, for example, the reason that we have a lot of canned foods, preserved foods, and also fast food has a lot to do with the fact that during World War II, we needed convenient means to produce food not only for our soldiers, but for those domestically who were working to support the war effort. And this started primarily in the United States. During World War II, a lot of women went to work, for example, started to join the workforce, so they didn't have as much time to cook and to make actual meals. Likewise, the soldiers didn't have time to cook. They needed food on the spot while they were in battle. So this is when we started to make a lot of preservatives, a lot of canned foods, and even fast food within the United States, because to meet a need, that a convenience for people who literally did not have time during that period.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, however, after the war ended, this sort of stayed with society. This was entrenched into society. Even prior to that, the city was not as driven by these standards of food production. There was still, emphasis on natural food products, food taken from the farms and the markets and things like this. And now you're starting to see a rising in organic food as a result of the health conditions or the negative health effects that have occurred as a result of eating all these preservatives and all this fast food and all this junk, And ironically, it's more expensive than the artificial stuff. Anyways, so what has occurred has really been the result of taking advantage of something that was once actually practical and meaningful and actually had a reason, and turning that on its head as a sort of just as a cash cow. And now we live in a society where we can't live without preservatives, canned foods, and non-organic materials. We need all of these things because we find it to be more convenient. Not only that, more convenient, but also cheaper. As for the cities, the majority of the populations are in cities around the world. As a result, you also have greater pressure to provide for yourself and your family because it's more expensive there. Therefore, you're going to look for cheaper products. And also the work ethic within the city are also much higher in the sense that people are required to work more in order to survive. As a result of that as well, you're going to have people looking less at their food intake and looking more for, at the quality of their food intake and looking more for the quantity, what is necessary in order to continue that work ethic. So it's very holistic in the sense that the society itself is not only pressuring people to have these convenient standards that are problematic for their health, but also it's people not being aware of their health because they're so focused on fulfilling those societal standards. So in reality, it's a two-way problem that needs to be resolved on both ends. How that's going to happen is I don't really know, to be honest with you. But as Muslims, we do have to be aware of this, and we have to find a way in which we can create a balance, in which we can go back to a healthy standard of living while still, adjusting to our environment. Like I said, it's problematic because we have organic food industry now, which is actually more expensive still than the artificial food industry. We have...
so in other words, only the rich can eat healthy, right?
Well, essentially, but the problem here is that that's the case. But you see, the other problem is that Muslims, I think we can actually solve the problem. I think we can. I think the halal market is very much open to the possibility of creating an organic brand that it doesn't have to just simply appeal to the Muslim community, but can also appeal to the non-Muslim community. I think that Muslims should be one of the first people or the first communities in the world that really pushes organic food products that are affordable to the local population. I don't know how that's going to be done, but I think that we have the awareness and the motivation to do so, and I think that we need to start doing that.
It's interesting you bring this up though, because especially in Toronto, in the GTA area where we live, there's a couple of butcher shops, you can say here, which actually source their meat from Mennonites and Amish communities, and it's halal. So it's all obviously organic, raised without antibiotics and any of the pesticides on the grass itself. So it can be done. I think we humans are very social. So obviously we have to, as Muslims, also organize ourselves into communities. Me personally, I do still bring, plastic at home, water in the plastic bottles because this is the only option I've got. So if we start probably, creating a community awareness and maybe, developing our communities where we are living Quran, not just reading Quran, actually implementing it within our lives as a community, I think that would be probably a more viable option. Just how, I'm keep mentioning Mennonites and Amish communities, but, they're great examples. And examples of how they can actually disassociate from the very flow of the society. And I'm not saying that completely be anti technology, but to some extent at least when it comes to health and environment, we can certainly do that. If there's a will, there's always a way, as the whole cliche goes.
I agree with you. I think that there are perfect examples, and I think that starting at a communal level will really kind of help to universalize these standards eventually in the future. That said, I wanted to mention one more thing. I think that it's kind of a radical opinion, but I've had it in my mind for quite some time. But I honestly believe that at some point, if societies, especially if governments, really want to help their populations, some other things are going to have to be done. So, for example, the governments will start having to bring in standards of food much higher than we have today. Much higher than that it will allow for those artificial food and preservatives to be on the shelves. And I also believe that at some point, a lot of Western societies, especially, need to start having, or maybe even non-Western societies need to start this trend. Need to start putting what I call caps or limitations on the amount of food that can be produced in society. I know that sounds strange, but if you think about it, for instance, how much food is wasted in the United States per year, it's absolutely insane. I mean, we literally waste the majority of our food. I mean, we could feed the entire world if we wanted to, but because we value the production of it more than actually preserving it or using it. We value just having a lot of chicken, a lot of beef. We just value having as much as possible, But the result is always negative. We've never seen a positive result of that. And of course, we see people getting more obese, and we just see a lot of that food that could be used going into the garbage. There has to be a point where the government and society steps up and says, hey, we have too much. This is a problem.
Yeah. That's interesting you bring this up because I grew up back home, and I grew up actually in Pakistan. And I remember when I was growing up there, I believe on Tuesdays and Thursdays, the butcher shops were pretty much closed throughout the city. So they were basically closing them down just to control the consumption of the meat. So because back in the day, I'm talking about 15, 20 years ago, the farming was not, technology was not really implemented into the farms where they can feed them with antibiotics and steroids to kind of grow them within weeks instead of months. So that's how they were controlling the consumption. So I kind of can relate that to what you just said right now as well, that, we also have to, as a community and as humans, change our eating habits. It's not really good for our health and also for our environment. And we just need to be more aware of it. We can't be eating, obviously, meat and chicken every day. We're not built to eat that way. And there's a lot of research which is done on that as well. So right now, it's just like, we turning into a zombie consumer society where, we want to eat as much food as we want, at the same time, accumulate as much money as we want, as much capital we want as well.
Yeah. The only time in history, I think, that human beings can live to a high average age of life, and still be as unhealthy as possible. We have the technology to keep ourselves alive while still being more unhealthy than our ancestors.
And the funny thing is that starvation still continues in certain parts of the world, and the world already produces more than like 1.5 times enough food for everyone on this planet. So it's a problem, as Brother Nadeem has mentioned, of the worldview as well, as the capitalistic world setup as well, which has formed basically this dysfunctional world.
Yeah. I mean, we are going across the globe, raising wars just to give humans and mass populations some basic human rights. But we are forgetting, we have more than 1/3 of the world's population which can't even, eat, 1 time a day. African continent being the prime example, and that's the basic human fundamental right to start off with. Then we move on to the other rights. Probably Nadeem, you can talk about it a bit more as well.
Yeah. I mean, Africa is the most exploited continent on the earth, and it's such a huge continent. And on Mercator's projection, you'd think that Greenland is almost the same size as Africa, but actually Africa is 14 times larger than Greenland even. And, sub-Saharan Africa, that could be a food basket, produce food for the whole world. There's so much there. But those areas have been, there's war going on in those areas, and destabilization. And because of that, then, you have people starving. You could do so much, you see, with technology. And you could, for example, develop desalination plants around Africa, and then just, everyone would get water, but there are water problems in Africa, for example. In India, they actually had a surplus of rice, and they they were exporting it, but people in India were starving in certain areas. So really, it's a much deeper problem. It's a political problem where we're not really, mankind is not being in submission to God. Mankind has gone away from the Quran, which is supposed to be the whole of mankind, right? So if you want to solve the environmental problem, the whole of the world should become Quran-centric. You see, you can have half the world, for example, following the Quran and the other half not following it with the environmental issue, because, pollution doesn't recognize borders, right? So pollution is not going to stop at the, Ummah and non-Ummah, border if there is, and then, pollution is just going to go into the Ummah area, right? So what I'm saying is that we live in a dysfunctional world, and these are symptoms. What we're talking about right now are symptoms. But that doesn't mean that, we can't make people aware, help, change policies. And, the verse in the Quran which says that, corruption has appeared on the land and the sea because of what the hands of man have done, and Allah has allowed this to happen so that they might reflect. So the changes you see now are those which are happening because people are realizing, we're really messing it up. It's harming us too, right?
Yeah, so, and again, this verse was actually quoted by you too as well, Brother Asadullah, when I saw your lecture, where it's basically basic cause and effect, right? We're gonna mess you up, they're gonna mess us up, and that's what we see right now.
It's give and take, and at the same time, you can't. The earth itself, creation itself, prostrates to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It worships Allah. So in many ways, it also responds to how we treat it as well. I mean, it's not cognizant in the sense that humans are, but it is aware in the sense of how it's being treated, and it will react accordingly. And that's something that we need to be cognizant of, because we need to understand that we're not dealing with a passive agent here. The moment that you damage a tree, or do something even worse than that, you're going to get repercussions. It will fight you to survive, and Mother Nature will win. It always has.
Yeah.
So that's something that we need to also know. So.
Yeah. Actually, to that point, I believe there's a verse in the Quran. I haven't read that for a while. So it's basically saying that the earth is going to on the Day of Judgment, it's going to, basically say what happened on it, what we did to it. There's a verse like that in the Quran. So So that you may say, how does an inanimate object do that? That's a deeper topic, but because a record of everything it has been made. There's nothing that's left out of the record, and these records, they're going to come out, right? So then we have to be very conscious of what we do to the earth. And I think that it leads to you had this other question, about the second question you had, Zishan?
Yes.
I think this leads into that, really, about being Khalifa and
Yeah,
so
you wanted to...
maybe I can comment and then
sure go ahead.
Okay, so what it is that the word Khalifa, it means successor linguistically, but the idea of stewardship, custodianship, or being or trusteeship, it comes from another verse which where Allah, He wants to give the trust, the amanat, to the hills, the mountains, to nature, and they refuse because they're very cautious. But it says that human beings, they basically, the Quran is saying that they have accepted it, but they are ungrateful, right? So, in other words, if you are a Khalifa, if you are a steward and a trustee, then you will only be so if you are grateful to God. And if you're grateful to God, you must know that He exists. You must be, have appreciation for His creation, and you must love His creation. That's how you get appreciate. You're grateful and have show appreciation, right? For why you have appreciation. You love the creation, so you would not damage anything. Like the example I use is if you loved Rembrandt's paintings, would you go and desecrate them? You wouldn't, right? So it all comes from that idea of being grateful to God.
So it's all connected to God, right? So I mean,
yeah.
again,
So I'm just trying to tie it into what Brother Asadullah was saying, about the earth. And,
yeah, exactly.
I think Brother Haque
So,
is correct in this respect as well. And I don't think I've been touching up on worldview as much as I think is important, and because it does play a large role here. I mean, for example, like we already mentioned, sort of the materialistic capitalist society doesn't exactly help because it doesn't live for long term. It lives for the here and now, which creates a lot of negative effects on the environment and well-being. But at the same time, there are other religions that even have similar negative beliefs. I mean, so for example, there is a major problem within Hinduism. I don't know if you've been to India, but it's one of the garbage capitals of the world for a reason, and it has less to do with the fact that they're materialistic, and it has a lot to do with a lot of their own principles, in the sense that, I mean, if you look at the Ganges River, for instance, which is their holiest water source, right? They put everything from dead bodies to feces in that river, and bathe in that river, and use that river for everything possible, because they believe that there is no actual way that it can be polluted. Okay, but it has led to a lot of health issues as a result of that treatment. And they also see food not necessarily as a source of consumption, but also as primarily as a means to sacrifice to idols. So, for instance, I don't know if you've noticed this, but a lot of times there are many festivals where they'll dump gallons of milk, out, onto statues and things like this, when half of their population is starving. This is very problematic. I know. I'm not trying to bash Hinduism necessarily, but I am trying to say that there's some major criticisms here that need to be made, because they have a lot of resources, and the way in which they use those resources is detrimental to their own society.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
True.
It's basically it's elements of basically irrationality, which is not only found in the way the capitalism functions, right, but also certain dogmas of certain religions and how that's practiced, and that's a practice of irrational action, right? So that's a really good example regarding the Ganges River you're talking about.
Yeah. Actually, in my study of Islam and the environment, so I looked at many belief systems, and I'm just amazed by the perfection of in Islam, basically. I mean, it should be perfect. It comes from the Creator, and you can prove that too, right? So for example, in the Quran it says, if this book were from other than Allah, then surely you'd find in it many inconsistencies. So the whole book is based on rationality, on cause and effect, and because people have gone away from cause and effect, and because a lot of these religions have gone against cause and effect, then you end up with ridiculous things like that, and so you find problems in Christianity too, where in the Bible it says that that you must dominate the earth. Of course, originally the Christianity, Prophet Isa, they're Muslims, right? And this was not the original message, the way we have it right now. So it's being distorted. Yet at the same time, you do have, very ecological verses in the Bible, but people tend to then go to the ones that they can use, right? So if you're a capitalist, you'll say, well, I'm being a human being, I'm the top of creation, and I can do whatever we want to. Plus, it says in the Bible too that we can dominate the earth. Now, a lot of Muslims have this concept as well, that we can dominate the earth. We're ashraf al-makhlukat, and they have this wrong kind of concept. This is not the right concept, and really the paradigm needs to change. And this paradigm is that we are maintainers of the balance. I just want to say about the balance that we are not there to create the balance. It's just there already. We came there as Johnny-come-latelys, and we've been messing up that which is already there. That's why the Quran says maintain the balance, right? It's not saying create the balance or something like that. It's already there. Just don't mess it up. That's what Allah is saying.
Sure. I think Nadeem, you're also referring to the verse where Allah says in the Quran that a lot of animals on this earth are being made subservient to humans, and that actually it's very deep in the sense that it does hold a lot of accountability, as humans on earth. If we have animals which are subservient to us, so it's a two-way street, as the brother Asadullah mentioned before. So obviously accountability on this earth, is cause and effect relationship. You mess with me and then Mother Nature will mess back with you. And also accountability in the akhirah. Dunya meaning something which is near, not necessarily below, something near, and akhirah something which is far. So Allah always talk about these two things, back and forth. So accountability on this earth, as we mentioned before, cause and effect, and obviously accountability in the end. So that obviously relates back to the worldview all over again, right?
But the only thing is that the verses in the Quran, there's a word called sakhara. Sakhara means to be able to. Allah has given you these things so that you can use them. But wherever you see the word sakhara, then it's talking about that it's God who's given you this, and you're responsible, you're accountable. So it's like a formula. Whenever the word sakhara, it's not used independently, and it doesn't mean dominate in that sense, right?
Right.
So just like, for example, whenever the word truth is mentioned, then action is also mentioned, like truth and action in the Quran. Mm-hmm. So similarly, the word sakhara is kind of before and after. You should see what it says before and after, and it kind of sandwiches it in a kind of a certain kind of a way that shows you that it's not dominating. At the same time, it is true, you see, that human beings are unique. You see, then the other problem is that a lot of Muslim environments are saying, oh, there's nothing unique about human beings. We're just like the rest of creation. That goes to another extreme. That's not reality. We are unique. We've been made unique. We have the ability to follow the laws of God or not, right? Animals don't have that ability. They're always in submission to God, right? Mm-hmm. So then, anyway, I just thought I'd add that.
No. Thanks a lot. We're just nearing the hour's end. Before, is there anything else any of the brothers want to add? Brother Asadullah?
Well, for any of the Muslims that'll be listening to this lecture, or this podcast, I'm sorry, I would like to give some advice. If you want to raise your awareness of environmental issues, just go online, look up some of the problems that are occurring in the world today with regard to the environment and to animals and things like this. And at the same time, if you want to do something, starting small is always the best way. Nobody's asking you to be like a tree hugger or anything, or going out there and risking your life, to save trees or anything like this. But what we're asking is that you just be more, not only more aware, but more concerned about your environment and how things are. So pick up trash off the ground when you see it, throw it away. If you see something, do something, even as small as it is, it'll help. For example, one of the things that I've tried to advertise in the past year or so is the issue with honeybees. I don't know if you're aware of this. I think most people are at this point. But honeybees are now an endangered species, at least here in the United States. They are an endangered species because of the fact that we've been using all these pesticides and such. They are now developing like cancers and things, and they're starting to die off. And you can see the results of it. And it's quite horrible, actually, because now you're starting to see that there are less plants around, less types of plants, less types of flowers, even less animals around as a result of the honeybees not being able to pollinate. And this has caused a lot of issues, and, a lot of scientists are now concerned about the long-term effects of this. And, we're trying to save a lot of these bees, but one of the ways you can actually help the bees is by planting your own flowers in your garden, like literally just planting your own flowers in your garden that bees are attracted to. You can look at online, see the types of bees. And then
for me, I'll get more wasps in my backyard.
Yeah, but it's a good idea to do that, because not only that, but you'll start bringing it. And when you see the results, you'll notice that not only will the bees come, but you'll start seeing other things as well. So, for example, the butterflies, because what they found was that many of the flowers that bees are attracted to, also the monarch butterflies are attracted to. And unfortunately, we've also been seeing less of those as well, which are a food source for many birds and other such animals. So do something like that. Do something small, something that doesn't take much time, and you'll start seeing the differences, and then you'll start becoming more aware of your place in the world. So
yeah, definitely. Basically practical steps, right? Well,
nothing is too small.
Yeah, exactly. Brother Ali, you wanna add anything before Brother Ali?
Good, actually. Nadeem, if you have any closing remarks, go ahead.
Let's see. I think there was a hadith, if I can remember it correctly, that the Prophet saw one of his companions bathing in a river, and so the Prophet said, oh, what is this? You're wasting the water. He said, but I'm in the river, right? So and he said, even if you're in the river, you shouldn't waste the water.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this idea of sensitivity and awareness, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Well, I'd like to thank you both, Brother Asadullah and Brother Nadeem Haque, for sharing your thoughts on this very important topic. It is a very vast topic, and the conversation continues. But I really thank you both, and I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. And till next time, be plugged in.